Welcome back, Mistakes listeners. This is Dave, and this is Parenting Mistakes. This is episode 54. We recorded this episode on February 8th, 2016, and this would happen to be part one of a two-part special for Super Bowl 50. That's right, Todd and I looked at the Super Bowl and all that it encompasses. As you know, you can tweet us at Twitter at Parent Mistakes. You can also like us on Facebook at Parenting Mistakes. The other thing, too, that we've introduced is Patreon. You can actually donate to us if you so desire to just continue to do all the great things that Todd and I do. You can go to Patreon, and I think it's just Parenting Mistakes at Patreon. And, of course, if you want to email us directly, you can email us at parentingmistakes@hotmail.com. And as always, sit back and enjoy the show. Todd?
Yes, sir.
This was the grand experiment, as you know. And what our listeners don't know, or what they do know, is they know that I don't like sports. But you are actually a sports family. But it was, quote-unquote, my idea to sit down and watch Super Bowl 50. Together.
Yes.
We actually,
yes.
Sorry, not together, in our respective locations. Todd is in California. Are you still in Bellflower?
We actually live in Lakewood.
Oh, Lakewood. Well, why do I get confused with Bellflower?
Well, our church is in Bellflower, and you've been to Bellflower, and we used to live in Bellflower a long time ago.
Okay, so you actually live in the town of Lakewood.
Yes.
Okay. I actually live in Hero Township of Seattle, like the actual Seattle.
Correct.
So that being said, and now you have a little more info that you didn't have before on us. We sat down and we watched football. I have never really sat down and watched any particular game at its full length, at its full strength. So I can't say that I've watched anything exciting. I can't say that I've actually watched anything boring, although I have sit through baseball, and I find baseball, my sports experience, if I have to go to the stadium, usually revolves around one of those little halftime tchotchke things that you see in the big screen. Like I always root for the Hydros at the Mariners. Like I get excited about that, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
The little mini games that are there at those sporting events. I love those because they detract from the actual event, which I find completely boring. Anyway, that, in essence, is kind of setting the tone with my background with sports and also gives you a little bit of perspective as to where I'm coming from when we're reviewing Super Bowl 50. Where are you coming from when reviewing Super Bowl 50, Todd?
Well, you got to get a bit more specific with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to establish where our viewpoints come from, right? So I'm actually coming from. I'm basically that guy who's never seen Star Wars, right?
Yes.
We talked about it a couple episodes back. You're like, there are actual people out there in their midlife or even in their 60s or 70s who have actually never seen Star Wars, and might be their first time seeing it. For me, this was actually my first Super Bowl. I've seen it over people's shoulders, but I've never taken any interest. I've actually never been to a Super Bowl party. None of that. None of the culture I've been involved in. So when viewing this event, it was brand new to me.
Yeah, I think the hard part of evaluating it is, as you said, our family is a sports family. So we watch sports throughout the year. We watch football, both college and pro. We watch baseball. And we watch March Madness, which is college basketball. And when I say March Madness, it's solid basketball for like 3 straight weekends.
So you guys always have a TV on with basketball in the background, or a radio for that matter.
Well, TV, yeah, and literally the first weekend, it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's from like 9 a.m. to like 8 or 9 p.m. It's like 12 straight hours of basketball. And on New Year's Day, see, this just all sounds awful. Folks, you can't see this because it's a podcast, but Dave has this blank look on his face like
big whoop.
You do this on purpose. Why?
That's right.
New Year's Day is a big sports day for us. We will get up in the morning and we'll watch the Rose Parade starting at about 8.
That's associated to sports?
Well, no, but it's part of the festivities.
Oh, okay.
But we'll watch the parade, and then the first football game starts around 9:30, and we will watch football straight through from about 9 a.m. all the way through to about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, depending on whether or not we like the last game or not.
Yes.
So, obviously, yeah, my lens is familiarity with sports and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, and in this podcast, which is actually part 1, we're going to actually talk about American football.
Correct.
And with that in mind, because this is parenting mistakes, we're trying to see whether or not this is something that kids should watch or not watch. Not even that. Like, what is it for kids? How do kids get anything out of this?
Correct.
Sorry, I don't mean to make a big question there.
No, it's a good question.
Analyzing the Super Bowl, because here's the deal, and this is what you and I agree on. Families get totally absorbed, just like yours, into this event.
Correct.
And for me, as an outsider, I'm like, okay, I want to know why that occurs, and what is it about football that makes it, so we're going to talk about the game and a little bit of football. But we're going to talk about this game in particular, possibly, well, actually, and hopefully we can connect it to how this relates to kids viewing?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yes, that's where we're going.
I hate to have that inflection, but I'm trying to make sure that we're here on the same page. I know that was the objective, but it's to be honest with you, Todd, it is a huge, and to the crowd out there that's listening to us, it is a huge mystery to me, and still an enigma as I discuss it with you right now.
Okay.
So, let's get into it. I watched the Panthers versus the Broncos.
Very good. You have correctly identified the teams.
I can sweat a little less now.
That's right.
I was like, I'm going to screw this up.
Very good. Very good. Well, first test.
All right. Here was the story. Okay, this is the story that I understood about the game. The Panthers are the team that. Okay. So the way they built this out was that the Broncos had Peyton Manning.
Yes.
Okay, Peyton Manning is an old guy. He's in his 40s, or he actually is 40.
He's 39.
He's 39. Okay. He doesn't look 39. The dude looks.
Well, I think he's 38.
A lot older.
Yeah,
he
late
looks older.
30s, early.
That guy is beat up. Okay.
He is beat up.
In fact, the commentators kept on saying, "Oh, that guy looks so old. He looks tired. He looks tired." That's what they kept on saying.
Yes.
And what they were saying was that these Panthers were the young bucks, the young guys, with, I'm not going to say it because I don't know their history, but just coming in from it, it seemed like they just didn't have all the experience that the older Broncos, more experienced team had. And so it was basically a battle of youth versus wisdom, old age. I mean, that was sort of some of the sidelines that I could actually see and understand what was happening.
Well, and if I may interject, and I'm going to let you just keep rolling with that, understand, and this is something that we have dealt with in this podcast a lot of times, is that regardless of what we're watching, usually there is a story. And even in sports, fans are interested in stories.
Which is new to me. That's totally new to me.
Right. So I'll just sort of fill in that gap to start with. I'll say, yes, the person that watches sports enjoys the sports for the sake of it. The athletic achievements and the ability of people to do certain physical things that the average person cannot do. But there is often a story.
And to me, this seemed to be the story. right?
Yeah, a little bit.
And what I was told, was that I should be rooting for the Broncos because this would be probably Manning's last game, and people wanted to see him kind of go out on top. Not only that, I guess even watching the sporting event.
It's a show.
Okay, it's very confusing. There are 200 games for Manning walking out. This would be his 200th football game, and it would be great if he could just win this thing, and it'd be very exciting and all that stuff. And so,
well, it's a narrative that is common in, action movies and a variety of other stories, sort of the riding off into the sunset idea.
So yeah.
Going out on top.
So here's the deal. Because it was spun that way, and because I was told to root for the Broncos, which I'm not even sure exactly what rooting means. I'm dead serious. Again, okay. I have rooted for things. I usually root for the Federation over the Klingons because, when thinking about something that I can actually try to figure out, I am attaching myself to a particular team in hopes that I can raise my level of excitement for the game, because if my team begins to lose, I'm going to feel anxious, and it's going to keep me attached to that game.
Correct. And
now, is this a prerequisite, or can you actually just kind of go in? Because what I hear a lot is people saying, well, this is the team I'm rooting for.
Well, it certainly makes it more interesting because it is a conflict. You are introducing, and this is a theme that we could talk about with kids. You have introduced the idea of a conflict. Someone must win, someone must lose. There isn't going to be it's going to be a bunch of guys running around and they're going to do some cool stuff, and in the end, they're all going to hug and shake hands and then just walk off the field, and it's the ungame. Where nobody wins and nobody loses, and we all just love each other. No, that's not the way it is.
The ungame.
It's the. Did you ever play the ungame?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Any child that came out of the 70s played the ungame.
Yeah. So that's an interesting theme to introduce to a child of saying, yeah. And, and as a general rule, I would say a lot of fans, they root for a team because it's an expression of, say, a civic engagement. So in other words, their home city or the city they're living in. Civic pride, I should say. Or it's an extension of, say, another relationship they have. So this is my mom's favorite team, my dad's favorite team, my brother's favorite team, or my friend's favorite team, so I'm going to go with that.
Right. And in this case, I was told, because I had no association whatsoever, the Seattleites that I actually watched the show with were saying, we're going to root for the Broncos because we want to see Manning go out on top.
Right. And it's kind of the deal of, because the Panthers are actually the team that beat the Seahawks. Oh. My Seahawks. I don't know if it's our Seahawks, because I don't know if you care, but, it's our Seahawks. So then you have to
if we went with the rooting psychology, then they would be my Seahawks, because I would have to root for my team if my team is playing.
Correct.
I don't have to.
So then do you root for the team that vanquished your team, or do you root for the other team because they're playing against the team that vanquished your team?
Wow. This is what you're teaching your children. Is you're saying, I mean, you're doing it by default. No one taught you how to root for a team, correct?
Correct, because neither of my parents were particularly sports fans.
Oh, okay. So naturally, you just started rooting for a team.
Well, yeah, and again, I root for Seattle teams. I'm loyal to Seattle teams. I've lived in LA for 20 years.
I like that statement, loyal.
Loyal, yeah.
It doesn't, listen to me, that's another weird term to say I am, okay, loyal is fine. It's weird in that, yeah, I'm loyal to my daughter's school. I'm loyal to my wife. But thinking about being loyal to a team that you've actually never shook your hands with, well, they've never come to your house and cleaned your house. They've never given you money. I guess they give you entertainment, right?
Entertainment. Well, and as I said, civic pride. it's a bragging rights thing for your city. And I will say this, one thing that I do try to teach my children that is connected to sports is a sense that when you are loyal to something, that means you stick with it through thick and thin. So
Okay.
you don't get to just say, "Oh, I'm a Broncos fan this year," and then next year in the Super Bowl you go, "Oh, whichever team's in the Super Bowl this year, I like them now."
I would probably do that based on colors, right? Because if I were to walk into it, I would have said I really like the Panthers colors better than the Broncos. But I guess that's me picking loyalty based on colors. Although, if it came to next year and I like the other team's colors better.
I understand.
Yes.
But that is something that I try to infuse into my kids, the idea that when you stick with something, when you commit to something, you commit to it. And you stick with it because you said you're going to stick with it. You don't just jump off the bandwagon just because it's not going as well as you hoped. It's sort of like, when we've done this for years with our kids. They've tried different things over the years. They've tried different, classes at the Parks and Rec. They've tried different sports. They've tried different interests. And our rule is similar, I think, to a lot of other parents where we say, okay, you can try this. If you're not having fun, we'd like you to at least finish, the season, finish the class, finish, the thing that you committed to starting. And then next year, if you don't want to do it again, fine. We won't do it again.
This is okay. You're associating this with, say, Jonathan saying, "I'm picking the Seahawks, Dad," and if he flip-flopped, you might be a little bit upset.
I wouldn't say upset. No.
I mean,
well, because
but at that point, the lesson is not learned because he's not remained loyal.
I understand that, but here's the thing: my wife is also a sports fan, so she brings different loyalties into the family. So therefore, if Dad is a fan of one team and Mom is a fan of a different team, then who did the children root for?
Okay.
I mean, okay. Let me step back for one quick thing. Let me step back for one quick thing.
Okay.
And let me make something very clear. Sports, in the grand scheme of the universe, is really not that important. As much as I tie this to parenting and life lessons and that sort of thing, grand scheme of things, sports is not important.
Yeah.
And even the sports people know this.
Which would be your friend Dave here.
Right.
So let's get into some of... Okay, so we talked about loyalty, which is weird.
Okay, so tell me what you saw in terms of viewing the game itself.
The mechanics of the game... Okay, let me just take one snapshot. We'll get to some of this in part 2 because I wanted to talk about some of the culture around it, but we'll get to that to part 2, so leave that for our next episode. But I will say that I had some people who were with me. I kind of created a microcosm of a Super Bowl party at my house so that I could actually get that experience.
Okay.
And I had some loyal football viewers with me because they thought it would be fun to sit down with old, know-nothing Dave.
Yes.
In a good sense. And the scene, or I should say the football... Okay. Basically, you're driving the ball back and forth down the field to cross the line. Once you cross the line, you get to kick the ball into a goal. You get some extra points. Okay? Maybe 1 point. I think if you actually cross the line again, you get a second point. It's very confusing to me. But there's a lot of nuance to it. And I would say that there was actually a pass. Now, do I remember the team? I don't. What I do remember was there was a pass that was made to somebody that actually caught the ball. He caught the ball, but he didn't actually catch the ball.
Yes.
But for all intents and purposes, from every camera angle, because they've got like 25,000 cameras on these guys.
They do.
It didn't look like the ball touched the ground, but it didn't look like he had a good solid hold on the ball.
Correct.
Like if I were to catch the ball, I'd want it to land in my hands and I want to stick it to my chest. The problem is he caught the ball and it landed kind of next to his elbow, underneath his chest to the side, and he did a 360 in the air, and they called it a
Incomplete pass.
incomplete pass. For all intents and purposes, this looked like he completed the pass.
Yes.
But my fellow football buddies were like, well, it doesn't look like it. You're right. There's like an incredible amount of analysis over this very nuanced, I threw the ball to the guy, he actually didn't catch it, but he did. But he didn't.
Correct. And we do not have time in this podcast to get into the complexity that is the NFL's issue with catches. I will just say in the last year or two, and part of this is due to technology. The cameras are so good, and they can slow it down, and they can zoom in, and they've got all these angles that they've almost sort of micromanaged it to the point where nobody even knows what a catch is anymore.
Yes, this is what occurred in my living room. The
Yes.
two football fans were sitting next to me,
Debating.
puzzled.
Yes.
It wasn't really a debate. It wasn't an argument, because I'm sure there were arguments elsewhere. But for them, it was a puzzle to be solved, along with every other fan that was there. And this was just a simple pass, but incredibly nuanced.
Correct.
Right? So
Yes.
this game, which in my opinion is basically you try to get the ball from the end of the field to the other guy's side to cross the goal line, suddenly becomes very, very complicated when you've got so many cameras, so many refs, so many fans. Because I guarantee if this is flag football in high school or something like that, I'm guessing the guy would have gotten the pass. They would have said, pass complete. Is that what they say? Like,
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's an introduction. It's an interesting introduction to kids if they're watching.
yeah, and so I'm like, what do kids get out of that? Right? Like, other than we're all sitting there puzzled. And how about this? It's not simple anymore. It is not a simple event. Where
Correct.
it seems simple, at the end of the day, it's not. It's
Right.
so over the top crazy that you actually catch the ball, but you don't actually catch the ball.
Correct. Now, yeah, to your question, what do kids learn about this? They learn that life is incredibly complex. They learn that adults like to argue about a lot of strange stuff. And maybe that's all they get.
Was it a complete pass? Did he actually catch the ball? Right?
The world may never know.
I guess that's where it sits. Well, they called it incomplete, right? That's the
Yes.
right term. It was an
Yes.
incomplete pass, even though holding my breath, catching my breath, he caught it.
Well, and again, we have to step back and sort of say, okay, is this really the important lessons of life that we have to sit down and have a philosophical discussion with our kids? Not
But
necessarily.
Here's where I come from it, Todd. Is it any fun at that point? Was watching the game and participating in it and spending almost, I would say, 5 minutes of that game just re-rolling that camera over and over and showing you every single angle and the refs discussing what was going on. Like, basically the game is not moving at that point.
Right.
And I would have to say that if I was just watching this for entertainment value, I'd find this incredibly boring because this is the first time that some of these technicalities happen throughout the game.
Right.
The game doesn't just flow. The game is like a series of stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, start, start. And as a kid, I would never watch that. My daughters don't watch that kind of TV. They don't
Sure.
watch that kind of show. Can you imagine watching, say, My Little Pony and, we're going to stop it,
And the
and we're going
adults
to
are going to
focus
talk
in
for a
on
while.
Pinkie Pie, and Pinkie Pie is going to have a discussion about how her tail is really fluffy, and is it really fluffy or is it not fluffy? I mean, again, I'm not exactly sure. Again, the entertainment value is lost on me at that point. And I feel like the adults are kind of not particularly entertained, but, I mean, did you find that really interesting? Were you, like, intrigued by that moment? Were you, like, everybody's benefiting from this?
Well, it certainly adds an element of drama to the game. And I think what's interesting is this is where you get into questions about whether kids should be watching the reactions of adults, because whichever coach is not going to get their way in those particular situations, that coach is going to go ballistic in some cases, start yelling at the refs. If you read the coach's lips, you can read, what they're saying. There's profanity. There's definitely some profanity. The networks, to their credit, and they have to do this because of the FCC, the networks turn away the microphones. I don't know if you know this or not, but like those sounds that you hear the quarterback yelling,
Mm-hmm.
you hear the hits, you hear all that stuff. Those are directional mics down on the field with these little dishes that they're pointing directly at that to pick up every little bit of sound they can.
That is incredible.
To make it much more of a exciting event for the viewer, so they feel like they're there.
Sure.
But they have to turn it away from, say, the coaches talking, because otherwise you couldn't put it on television what some of these guys say. Same with the players.
So pushing on.
Okay.
From what I understood, some of the trying to get near to the end, because we only have we try to keep these episodes relatively short. I know.
Yes.
But this one we could go on for forever because there's so much new nuance and minutia. But at the end, the Broncos won.
Yes.
And everybody said it wasn't a very good game.
It wasn't.
But the Broncos won.
Yes.
Right? My man, the guy, the team I was rooting for. And at the end of the time, I guess there just wasn't enough drama. They didn't have enough, hey, that wasn't really a pass kind of thing. Or the score needs to be closer. The Panthers need to push harder. I guess there was a higher expectations that the Panthers would do more. And they didn't. I mean, all of this, I'm unsure of. You should be happy your team won, right?
Sure. And again, it depends on your perspective. I mean, if you think about some of the television shows we watch, the movies we watch, what if in, a Star Wars movie or a Star Trek movie, say in Star Trek, Captain Kirk and Khan are flying around in space and they just kind of shoot at each other and they just keep missing for like 45 minutes. They're just shooting lasers at each other, just, zap
right.
back and forth. And then eventually one of them just runs out of gas and then just crashes on a planet. You'd be like, yay, the Enterprise won. I mean,
yeah. Captain Kirk won again.
Yeah,
Oh.
That's sort of what this game was for football fans. Now,
So you wanted to see the Broncos really be tested. Because if the team is really being tested, like this should be their finest hour. Actually, should be both teams' finest hour. And they should both be being tested to their nth degree. And that...
I think some of it is, say, it's about our desire for action. This game was two pretty evenly matched teams that were sort of just nibbling back and forth up and down the field.
Why is that? Why was that happening?
Well, because they're two evenly matched teams.
But the Broncos clearly creamed the Panthers. Like, they got them.
No, they didn't clearly cream them. I mean, it took until pretty late in the game for them finally to get a score and put the game a little bit out of reach.
I think that was in the third quarter.
That was the fourth quarter. But to that point, the Panthers could have come back on one drive and taken the lead. And so what you saw was basically kind of a boxing match where people two guys sort of danced around and sort of jabbed at each other for a long time. Just kind of jabbing, not really anything exciting. There was a few good plays. And that is back to our question of why do we watch sports? Why do we watch sports with kids? Some of it is about sort of the physical feats. Seeing guys run fast, seeing guys jump in the air, seeing guys make acrobatic catches, and seeing people elude their, people that are chasing them. In this game, what you saw was a lot of people just kind of pushing and shoving back and forth. One team wouldn't get real far, have to punt it away. The other team wouldn't get real far, have to punt it away. And that's not as fun for football fans. Let me ask you this. And
Go
here's
ahead.
an A. Let me ask you this. We've talked about violence in kids shows. Whether we find, because that's a break point sometimes with kids shows, is the violence.
Mm-hmm. For us, it is for sure.
How did you see that factoring in with watching something like football?
Well, I think somebody got a concussion, didn't they? They got a concussion. They got their head hurt pretty badly.
Could be.
And I remember there being some sort of drama around that. But it's interesting in that if I'm watching an Avengers cartoon, they're not wearing a whole lot of uniforms. They're kind of out there. Their bodies are out there, and they're getting shot up and stuff. When you're watching football, it looks like they've got a lot of safety gear, and they're constantly referencing kind of safety in some measure, like why are these guys decked out the way they are, is to keep themselves kind of intact. The other thing, too, is you hear some of the crunching, and you see some of it. It feels a little like watching the Indy 500 and hoping that the cars wreck, right?
Yes.
You're going to be watching these guys kind of clobber each other, and you're like, ooh, right? Like, wow, that was a clobber. Is it incredibly violent? Not necessarily. There's kind of a disassociation. I mean, it's not my game. It's a better question, I think, for you than it is for me. It's such a, I don't think they're pulling guns on each other and shooting, right? So I think a lot of the concern for parents is out there is that, hey, that guy's pulling a gun on everybody he sees and he shoots them.
No,
Football
but
players aren't doing that.
correct. But what you're seeing is, and this is hard for the home viewer because we don't appreciate how big these guys are and how fast
Yeah,
they
I did notice they were pretty big. Some of them are pretty stinking big.
This is a case of, in some cases, a 300-pound man running at you full speed, crashing into you, and then falling on you. And, I know you don't follow the NFL. The NFL has sort of sustained a ton of criticism over the last couple of years.
Now, that's something I've actually watched quite a bit of.
Over concussions.
Yep.
And here I can say as a parent, I can admit that I'm a little bit of a hypocrite in that we watch football as a family, but I and my wife too, in agreement, we would not and we will not let our son play high school football, even though he expressed a desire to do so.
That is nutty. That is completely nutty.
Why is it nutty?
Because it is. It's a double standard.
It's
right?
a little bit of a double standard.
My wife and I are always laughing because as we get older, we're always talking about how people are very complex. Nobody's very simple. No one's a one note. And this is like one of those complexities in life. I thoroughly enjoy football, but there's no way I'm going to let my son play it. It's just one of those complexities of life, right? I can't say that did I say it was insane? It's not insane. It doesn't make any sense on paper, but when you think about it conceptually, it kind of makes sense. But at the same time, when you're saying your son can't play football, but he's totally willing to watch it occur, what are you saying at that point? Well, it's okay for other guys to beat each other up.
Yeah, well, I think part of it, too, is we've talked about this with a bunch of different shows. There are some parallels. It may be a tough parallel, but we will watch content that we will not then go mirror with our behavior.
That's right.
You'll watch shows that involve guns and racing and violence and criminal behavior, but we don't then go out and say, I'm going to mimic this. Now, football, I think, is a little closer to home because it is a legal, encouraged, participatory activity for kids.
Yep.
Versus some of the content that we may watch. So, yeah, is it inconsistent? To a certain extent, yes. But part of it, again, is saying, hey, if other parents want to let their kids do this, if they're aware of what they're getting into, then okay, go for it.
And I would say there's risk. Okay, I'm not trying to.
There's
play
risk in
this-
any sport
yeah,
that they
there's
play.
risk in any sports. I'm not trying to play it down, but football has a particular, as you're right, in the recent years has a particular reputation for some pretty harmful injury.
Sure. And again, you always go back to, if you know this, if you know that there is danger, and you make the decision yourself to go into it, well, then that's on you. Right? So, I mean, we could parallel that with a lot of different stuff that parents do with their kids.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest with you, trying to wrap this up a little bit, but I think what you were actually concluding, and I like what you're saying here because it's a good wrap-up, is that football, as far as the football game experience is concerned, it's not just about you watching football, it's about you watching football with your kids and having discussions around what is happening in football, right? Like you're already obviously having a discussion with Jonathan about how he associates real life with how he plays or doesn't play football and how he watches it with you. Would you recommend that kids watch football?
I don't know if it's that simple is the thing. I mean, is it a simple thing of yes or no? I think it's a case of, do you understand what you're actually watching? Part of it, too, is, kids may grow up and play, say, high school football. But the percentage of kids that are going to grow up and play at that level is slim to none.
That's true.
And again, we could get into a whole discussion about, whether or not, and we don't have time for this, but to talk about whether you idolize these people. You can certainly appreciate the fact that they can do some things physically that we just cannot do. That they're large people, they're very fast, they're very strong. But at the same time, they're also a bunch of guys in various sports leagues who are just not good people. They're not great citizens. They do drugs, they beat their
Right.
girlfriends. I mean, they commit various crimes, they get in fights. They're not great role models sometimes.
Well, who's football for then? Like, who should be watching football?
Well, I think part of it too, and we could, again, we can get into a long discussion, but it's sort of the modern gladiator arena in some ways.
That is a heavy-duty statement, dude.
Well,
which
it is.
Immediately
Well,
makes me say, my two daughters are not going to be watching football.
Well, that's fine. That's the
right?
thing.
I'm not saying no, I'm just saying that if that really is the case, I mean, you could say, I guess that is the case, right? This is modern-day gladiators doing their due diligence to, feed the crowd what they want.
Right. You're not putting, people in a coliseum with lions, but in a sense, you kind of are.
Yes, some of those dudes are lions. They're huge.
Yeah, you're putting people out there and knowing that they could get hurt.
Sure. And people did get hurt.
Yeah, they do get hurt. And, there's been a lot of stuff lately about, the long-term impacts of football on people. They're doing a lot more stories on older football players.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, but at the beginning of the show, they brought out a representative of every football Super Bowl, right?
Yes,
they brought out a football player for every
I
Super Bowl. And I don't know if you noticed, but all of them looked pretty beat up.
Yeah, some of them do.
They come out to look their best they can, but at the same time, like, some of those guys are kind of hobbling out there, right?
Right. Some of that has to do with the fact that these guys are actually just old.
Okay, I'll give them that.
Yeah, because they're doing 50 years of Super Bowls. So some of these guys are in their 70s and that sort of thing. I mean, people that don't play football that are in their 70s can hobble around sometimes.
That's true.
So that's just the way that it is.
But I'm telling you that some of these guys looked extra hobbly.
Oh yeah, and some of them are.
Yeah.
So
I think as far as football is for me, and where we sit with it, I think I'm fine with actually not being a football fan.
And that's fine.
Yeah, but let's say we get down the road and my kids get into sports. We'll see. Okay, you know what else? It's not just a we'll see. You know what it is? It is this. I think from what I'm learning from just talking to you and having the experience I did with this particular sports is that when you enter into this field, it's not an independent activity. The family kind of gets involved or sucked into it no matter how. You're going to watch it. You're going to buy equipment for it. You're going to try to understand it. You're going to try to understand what the rules are around it. And schools get behind this. Their friends will be associated to it. So what I'm saying and what I'm hearing is that football, in general, is not an independent thing. It will bring in everybody if somebody wants to be invested in it.
Well, and I could go ahead.
No.
Well, I can tell you that, like yesterday, we had some families over to our house for a Super Bowl party. We had a lot of food. We were eating chicken wings. We got some great, snacks. It was a lot of fun. And honestly, the kids, very few of them were actually watching the game. Most of the kids were running around the house. They were doing stuff in other parts of the house. They were outside, shooting a basketball or playing tag or playing soccer. The bulk of the people actually watching the game were the adults. And I would say my wife teaches at a high school, and I have 2 kids in high school, and we will go to the high school football games in the fall. The kids, particularly the younger kids, aren't watching the game. They're just running around with their friends and having a good time. So, to your point, there's lots of aspects of the activity that is about community. It's about getting together. It's about having a good time. It's about food and fellowship and that sort of thing. So is it about the activity all the time? Sometimes. There are kids that will watch the game. But a lot of times it's more about the adults than it is the kids.
I think this is going to leave us off for a good part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can follow us on Twitter, Parent Mistakes. You can like us on Facebook, Parenting Mistakes. And you can support us on Patreon. You type in Parenting Mistakes. And you can email us, parentingmistakes@hotmail.com. Until next year's Super Bowl day.